Welcome back, everyone, as we dive into the second half of the Great Northern War from our friend at the Armchair Historian. If you didn't see part one, there's a link down in the description that'll take you back to that first video so you can watch everything and get caught up to this point. I want to thank Christy Amaker, I hope I'm saying that right, Amaker from South Carolina, for your support on Patreon. Really appreciate it. Let's dive into this one.
By the spring of 1709, Charles set his sights on the fortress of Poltava. His army had withered down to roughly 22,000 men. Yet Charles believed a victory here could turn the tide.
So you got roughly the same amount of cavalry, but your infantry's outnumbered 3-1. And you are far from your base of supply, and you're not exactly fighting in the best of conditions.
Tsar Peter was aware of the Swedes' weakened position and gathered an army of over 40,000 men to confront them. On June 28th, the two armies met on the fields near Poltava. Charles, incapacitated by a gunshot wound to his foot, directed the battle from a stretcher. His plan relied on a swift, decisive assault to break through the Russian lines before they could deploy their superior numbers and devastating artillery. At dawn, the Swedes launched their attack. Initially, the Swedes gained ground, overwhelming Russian forward positions. But
in this situation, you have to win early on, because if it's an extended fight, you're done for. It's a similar mindset that was used by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. I mean, they understood they couldn't win a protracted, long, drawn-out war against the United States. It just wasn't practical. But a decisive blow quickly, you hope the United States negotiates something, or you just kind of sideline them. That's what you're hoping for here.
The battle progressed, the tide turned. The Russians were entrenched and well prepared, unleashing devastating volleys of musket fire and artillery on the advancing Swedes. Disorganized and without sufficient reinforcements, the desperate Swedish assaults faltered. Commanding in the midst of the battle, Tsar Peter ordered a massive counterattack. The sheer weight of Russian numbers overwhelmed the Swedes, who were forced into a panicked retreat. By the end of the day, the once invincible Carolean army was shattered.
So now what do you do? If you are Charles or Karl XII, do you negotiate? Do you pull back and end the war, or do you double down and try again?
Thousands of Swedes lay dead or captured, and Charles XII was left wounded and defeated, forced to flee south with a small band of survivors. Poltava marked the beginning of the end. The Caroleans who crushed Peter at Narva, cowed the Danes, and subjugated the Saxons were now beaten. Charles and his remaining followers escaped to the Ottoman Empire, seeking refuge as they plotted their next moves. Sweden's enemies had gained the upper hand, and the Baltic was theirs for the taking. Tsar Peter was quick to capitalize on his great victory at Poltava.
And now here's where, if you're Peter, you also have to be careful, right, is that you don't overextend yourself now. Now, Peter has a lot more resources, a lot more manpower than what the Swedish have, so he can risk extending himself more than the Swedes could.
By 1710, Russian forces were coordinating offensives all across the Baltic, swiftly dismantling Sweden's remaining strongholds in the region. The seizure of key targets like Viborg, Riga, and Reval effectively cut off Sweden's Baltic positions and left them on the defensive. Enemies swooped in like vultures from all sides to snag their piece of the collapsing empire. Over 1709 alone, Peter had reformed the original anti-Swedish coalition with Augustus II and Frederick IV, meaning both Saxony and Denmark-Norway were back in the war. To sweeten the deal for Augustus, the Tsar even pushed to have him reinstated as king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, forcing the powerless Stanisław Leszczyński into exile.
Everybody's always using Poland as their puppets in all this, aren't they?
Yet, for the Swedes, new enemies joined in to stake their claim of Swedish territory, with Frederick William of Prussia joining in 1713.
So I just kind of picture a dying animal and the vultures are circling, just waiting for their chance to get a piece of the dying animal once it's completely dead. And these guys are all suddenly just looking at Sweden as this prize to be divvied up, a lot like what's going to happen to some other nations like Poland in the centuries to come.
And George I of Hanover later joining in 1715.
That's King George I of England.
Without their king, the domestic situation at home was dire. The prolonged war was wreaking havoc on the Swedish economy. High taxes needed to fund the military were only worsening the famine and disease that now plagued the kingdom. Manpower was shrinking, while unrest was at an all-time high. If it wasn't for Sweden's highly competent and resourceful field commanders, the kingdom itself would have been forced to capitulate to its enemies. Still, in the court, there was only one question hanging on everyone's minds. Where was King Charles?
Right. It's not like this is a time when he can just pick up the phone and issue orders. I mean, he is separated by his enemies from his own kingdom. He's gone south, not north. He's just completely MIA at this point.
After Poltava, the 27-year-old warrior king had exiled himself into the Ottoman lands of Bender, establishing a nearby colony under the blessing of Sultan Ahmed III.
It was the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing going on here.
To be a temporary reprieve and a chance to plan his next move. The Ottomans were happy to receive the Swedes at first, seeing them as a potential ally against the Russians. In 1711, the Ottomans even scored a great victory in their own brief war with Peter, trapping a Russian expedition at the Pruth River. Outnumbered and undersupplied, the Tsar was forced to negotiate a retreat in exchange for conceding territory to the Sultan, abandoning his grip over the neighboring Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was a great deal for the Ottomans, but not for Charles, who needed the Ottomans on board as military allies in his northern war. With the subsequent peace, Swedish diplomats had to work tirelessly to change the Sultan's mind.
Right. You can't make peace. We need you to fight them. We need you to keep them occupied.
All the while, King Charles maintained a rigid daily routine of military drills, strategy sessions, and correspondences with Stockholm. At first, his resilience and routines earned him admiration, but it soon began to wear thin with his hosts, who had been footing the very expensive bill that came with hosting a king over several years.
Especially if they're now at peace with Russia, there's really nothing to be gained for them by hosting this army that they've got to feed and house.
By 1713, the Sultan had had enough, demanding Charles to leave, but the king refused and was placed under house arrest. Charles responded as one might expect of a warrior king, barricading himself in his residence with a small group of loyal Karelian soldiers who fought off Ottoman soldiers for hours before being captured again. As a prisoner, Charles was treated with relative leniency, but the humiliation of his situation was undeniable. The king who had once commanded Europe's respect was now a captive. Eventually, the king swallowed his pride and agreed to leave the Ottomans without his much-needed aid. The long ride back to Swedish territory was humbling, as he traversed hostile territory in disguise to avoid capture by his enemies. In November of 1714, King Charles entered the besieged city of Stralsund to take personal charge of its defense.
So I'm gonna sneak my way back into my country, and then I'm going to thrust myself into a besieged city. I mean, I'll say this about the guy. He absolutely has no fear.
But his morale boost did little to improve the damage of a 4-year-long siege, with the overwhelming coalition siege leaving the city in no better position. By December 1715, Stralsund fell, and Charles narrowly escaped capture by fleeing across the Baltic. After 15 years away on campaign, the king had once again set foot on home soil. But the once feared Swedish Empire had been carved apart in his absence. key Baltic territories were lost, and its economy was in shambles. Attempts to coordinate relief efforts across the Baltic Sea were also hampered by the weakened Swedish navy, which had lost over 2/3 of its fleet to Russian and Danish ships. Peter's coalition continued to chip away at Sweden's holdings, all the while attracting other potential members, with one of the newest being Great Britain, who declared war in 1717 after discovering the Swedes were collaborating with rebellious Jacobites in exchange for future war support.
So for those who don't know, the Jacobite rebellions are things that are happening throughout the 18th century. It's a rival claimant to the throne. This is George I is German. He doesn't speak English. German is his first language. It's one of the reasons why the United Kingdom, well, Great Britain at this point, it'd be the United Kingdom in another 90 years or so. But it's one of the reasons why Great Britain ends up with a prime minister in Robert Walpole, because you need somebody who speaks English to run the government. But he inherits the throne because they pass this act that bars any Catholics from the throne, and it bypasses dozens of people in favor of the next Protestant in line to the throne, which was Sophia of Hanover, and then her son, George I, Georg I. And the Jacobites then, Jacob being the Latin for James, they are in favor of who they see as the rightful claimants, which are the senior line to the Stuart throne, but they're Catholic.
It was quite the convenience for George I of Hanover, since he had already happened to be the king of Great Britain. Catastrophes aside, Charles immediately set about rallying what little forces he had left, launching an audacious plan to strike Denmark-Norway directly and force Frederick IV out of the war for the second time. In March 1717, he crossed into Norway with 8,000 troops, hoping to capture key fortresses, disrupt Denmark's northern supply network, and reignite Sweden's fortunes. What should have been a swift victory was...
please tell me you haven't noticed my name prominently in the middle of this entire image. It just says Chris, plain as day right there. So thanks for that.
Anything but. The Carolingians were prevented from capturing the capital due to the strong defense at the Akershus fortress. A harsh Norwegian winter and logistical difficulties also plagued the campaign, just as they did with the Russian campaign 7 years prior.
Can't account for the weather. You can account for anything, you can't account for the weather.
However, Charles was an older and wiser man by this point,
Let's hope
and
so.
chose to withdraw before his forces suffered any further. In 1718, Charles tried again, launching a second campaign into Norway. This time, his sights were set on Fredriksten Fortress, a critical stronghold guarding the route into southern Norway. Charles believed that capturing Fredriksten would open the path for a full invasion, forcing Denmark-Norway to the negotiating table. While he personally led the main force against Fredriksten, a second army under General Carl Gustaf Armfeldt marched against Trondheim. The campaign began with characteristic determination. Swedish engineers worked tirelessly to construct siege works. Trenches were dug parallel to the fortress, allowing the Carolingians to set in close to the walls. Charles, ever the hands-on leader, directed operations from the front. Like in the previous campaign, the Swedes faced bitter cold weather, challenging terrain, and fierce Norwegian resistance.
And in another kind of foreshadowing here, maybe it's not the best idea for your king to be directing operations from the front in a siege. Ask Richard the Lionheart how that worked out for him.
But morale remained high among the troops, thanks to the reassuring presence of their king. What came next was almost a supernatural turn of fate. On the night of November 30th, 1718, King Charles XII was busy inspecting the siege trenches under the cover of darkness when a bullet struck him in the head.
Was it a bullet, though? I don't think there's consensus on exactly what hit him because nobody actually saw it happen.
His body was slumped down against the parapet when he was finally discovered. Officially, this sudden yet anticlimactic death was said to be the work of a Norwegian sharpshooter.
So you see the image that he's showing there. If you Google this, you'll actually see the actual image of his skull. They have photographs of this, and it looks exactly like that.
Or stray grape shot. But
Right.
to this day, some conspiracies insist that the king's death was a result of sedition among war-weary troops.
It's absolutely possible that this was a friendly fire incident. That was a fragging incident, as you might call it. Somebody who just wanted to go home and they wanted to get rid of this guy that kept leading them into battle.
Or treachery from within the beleaguered Swedish court. Regardless of how it happened, the king's demise came as an immediate blow to the army left at Fredrikstad, who abandoned their siege and withdrew from Norway.
Which may be, if it was friendly fire, that's exactly what the friendly firer was hoping would happen.
Armfeldt's retreat from Trondheim wasn't spared any less of a setback, as more than 3,000 soldiers froze to death in a snowstorm during their long march back home. For Sweden, Charles' death was more than a battlefield defeat. It was a symbolic collapse of his imperial ambitions. The man who had risen to power as a teenage warrior king, who had marched across Europe with unmatched audacity, was gone.
And had driven his empire into the ground in the process.
It was a somber moment for everyone involved, including Tsar Peter, who declared a 1-week period of mourning
in the chat.
Russian court out of respect for his rival. In Stockholm, Charles' sister, Queen Ulrika Eleonora, had ascended to the throne in 1718. Her primary focus was to stabilize the kingdom and bring the war to an end. But
Not the worst thing after a hardcore warrior king to have a queen in there to maybe balance things out a little bit. Not that I am saying that women can't be hardcore warriors too.
Sweden was in no position to negotiate with the Russians. While most belligerents had relented and made peace with the Swedes in 1719 and 1720, Tsar Peter pressed on, launching a series of devastating raids along Sweden's coasts between 1719 and 1721 that left the nation even more vulnerable. Ulrika was losing her grip on the empire, and her attempts to uplift swaths of her countrymen into the nobility did little to help her falling reputation. By 1721, things had gotten so bad that the Swedish parliament agreed to Ulrika abdicating as queen in favor of her husband, Frederick of Hesse. This agreement...
So let's put a German in. I mean, because nothing says royalty like your country that's not Germany being ruled by a German. Happens all the time.
Also came with the caveat that Frederick would only rule as a limited and constitutional monarch, spurring on the Age of Liberty and the end of Carolingian absolutism.
And this is a century in which you're going to see this happen in France. You're going to eventually see it transitioning into constitutional monarchy in Great Britain, and later the United Kingdom. It's the process of that happening everywhere.
Even with this royal turmoil, the Swedes were eventually pushed to the negotiating table with the help of France and Britain, who used their diplomatic power to deter the Russians from directly invading Sweden, while at the same time helping facilitate peace with Sweden's new king. With no hope of regaining its lost territories by force, Frederick and the Swedish parliament began exploring terms with the enemy. By 1721, after more than 2 decades of conflict, Sweden's leaders recognized that the war had become untenable. Its economy was in ruins and its military was exhausted. Sweden entered peace negotiations with Russia, signing the Treaty of Nystad on September 10, 1721, which marked the official end of the Great Northern War. The treaty's terms were harsh for Sweden. It ceded significant territories, including Livonia, Estonia, Ingria, and parts of Karelia to...
And there you go. If you're Russia, now you've got those ports on the Baltic, right? That's what you're after.
Russia. These regions had long been central to Sweden's dominance in the Baltic, and their loss effectively ended their status as an empire. In return, Russia allowed Sweden to retain Finland and granted certain trading privileges, but these concessions did little to soften the blow. Meanwhile, Sweden's other adversaries were able to gain their own slice of the Swedish pie. the Treaty of Frederiksborg concluded hostilities between Sweden and Denmark-Norway earlier in 1720. Under this treaty, Sweden agreed to exempt Danish ships from naval tariffs and recognized Danish control over the parts of Schleswig previously held by the Duchy of Holstein-Gottorp. Thanks to the Treaty of Stockholm in 1720, Sweden ceded parts of Swedish Pomerania to Prussia and recognized Hanover's control over the area of Bremen-Verden. In Saxony, Augustus II had fully secured his second term as king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, though he was left as a junior partner to Russia. For Tsar Peter,
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody's a junior partner to Russia right now. They're the ones that led this whole thing.
the Treaty of Nystad was the culmination of his ambitions. Russia's new Baltic territories transformed it into a major European power. Peter's successes solidified his reputation as a visionary leader who had brought Russia back from the brink of collapse as one of Europe's newest and most formidable empires.
And all those people that he was dealing with that were like, we don't want to westernize, we don't like what you're doing, and becoming more like them, now they're shutting up a little bit, right? Because they're seeing, okay, well, maybe he had a point. Maybe there was something to all of this.
After 21 years of war, the Baltic was forever transformed. One empire fell as another rose. Across northern and eastern Europe, nations grappled with political disruption and economic upheaval.
So think about, we talk about alternate history and we talk about diverging points where things went in a different direction. Think about this moment, these last 20 years, how we see that shift in the balance of power from away from Sweden and toward Russia, toward Prussia, who's going to start rising as a great power and eventually lead to the creation of Germany a little more than 100 years later. So this is such a great turning point in European history here.
That reshaped Europe's balance of power. For Sweden, the Treaty of Nystad marked the end of their long reign as a dominant Baltic power. Once feared under the Carolingian soldier kings, Sweden emerged from the Great Northern War battered, humiliated, and humbled. The cession of territories such as Livonia, Estonia, Ingria, and Karelia to Russia not only stripped Sweden of its Baltic dominance, but also dealt a severe blow to its economy and prestige. The human cost of the war was equally devastating. Estimates of Swedish casualties vary, but the long years of war, famine, and devastation by enemy powers had hit Sweden's already meager populations quite hard. Military losses like that at Poltava saw over 10,000 men killed or captured. In one battle, virtually an entire Swedish field army was destroyed.
And this is not a nation that has 30, 40, 50 million people that they can sacrifice this kind of manpower.
Like the Russians, these were losses that Sweden could never fully recover from. Over the course of the war, Sweden's already shallow manpower pools dwindled down even further, leaving it unable to replenish its forces or defend its remaining territories effectively. In Finland, the Swedish defeat at Poltava had left it vulnerable to Russian occupation, bringing widespread famine, plagues, and devastation. Between 1714 to 1722, Finland's population was subject to many atrocities,
And so just to pause here before I get too far away from it, the topic of the population, I was doing a little looking up there while we were going through this, and Sweden had a population of like 1 to 1.3 or 4 million people. Like they barely had more than a million people. That's where they're at. This is a big deal.
Scorched earth and punitive raids killing many, while thousands of Finns were captured and enslaved by Russian occupiers to be sold in the Far East. It was a complete economic and demographic catastrophe that became infamously known as the Great Wrath, and it took many decades before the Finnish territories could fully recover.
So the next time you're tempted to praise Charles XII or Karl XII for his great military prowess, don't forget that his aggressive nature as a king directly led to some of this.
At home, the aftermath of the war spurred significant political change. The death of Charles XII in 1718 had left Sweden leaderless and vulnerable, forcing his sister, Queen Ulrika Eleonora, to take the throne. But her reign was short-lived. Facing widespread discontent and pressure from the nobility, she abdicated in favor of her husband, Frederick I of Hesse, in 1720.
Which we've talked about.
This transition came with a pivotal shift. Frederick agreed to rule as a constitutional monarch, beginning...
And this is what you do when you have this change in a dynastic house. There's an opportunity for a reset, because you're bringing somebody in who doesn't necessarily have a legitimate claim to the throne, but you're offering it to them with conditions. Well, we know you can't just claim it by divine right and by right of inheritance, but we're giving it to you, but you have to agree to X, Y, and Z. And who's not going to do that, right? Who's not going to come in and say, I'll take a throne that I otherwise wouldn't have with conditions, because it's still better than not having a throne.
The Age of Liberty. During this period, power shifted from the crown to the Riksdag, Sweden's parliament.
And yes, that is the same root Germanic word for Reichstag. You're going to see a lot of similarities because Swedish is a North Germanic language.
Now had significant control over governance. While this system curtailed royal authority, it also ushered in a more inclusive form of governance, albeit one rife with factionalism and political intrigue. Economically, Sweden faced the immense task of rebuilding after years of war. The loss of key territories disrupted trade routes, especially in the lucrative Baltic grain and timber markets. High taxes, war debt, and famine had already strained the population, leaving the kingdom in a weakened state. Despite these challenges, Sweden's transition to a constitutional monarchy provided a foundation for gradual recovery, as it stepped back from imperial ambitions to focus on stability and reform. For Sweden's enemies, the war came with its share of tangible gains and new opportunities. In Denmark-Norway, the war was an opportunity to reverse the losses suffered during its earlier conflicts with Sweden, and more importantly, strike out at Sweden's allies in the south. The Treaty of Frederiksborg solidified Danish control over Schleswig, which had been contested with the Duchy of Holstein-Gottorp. Thanks to this new territory, Denmark was able to strengthen its influence and chasing the insolent House of Holstein-Gottorp. Economically, Denmark benefited from Sweden's decline, especially in maritime trade. Sweden was forced to grant Danish and Norwegian exemption from these sound tolls, which...
This is all just killing Sweden, right? I mean, not only have you lost territory, but now you're losing trade rights, you're losing income from that, you're losing imports and the taxes that you were able to charge on those. This is all brutal.
Enhanced Denmark's control over Baltic commerce. The new peace also gave King Frederick IV an opportunity to begin a new colonial project in Greenland, starting with a royal charter issued to the Bergen Greenland Company in 1721. Lesser-known participants of the war included the German states of Hanover and Prussia, who were both compensated for their victories thanks to the treaties of Stockholm. In the Treaty of 1719, the Swedish territories of Bremen and Verden were ceded to Hanover, while the Treaty of 1721 awarded Pomerania to Prussia. Internally, the war had a far greater impact for Prussia. King Frederick...
Imagine if that territory had remained Swedish. I mean, it's crazy to think about.
William I used the conflict to initiate a series of sweeping reforms aimed at strengthening his kingdom's military and administrative capabilities. He expanded and professionalized the Prussian army, laying the foundation for what would become one of Europe's most disciplined and efficient fighting forces. Frederick William also introduced significant fiscal reforms, ensuring that the kingdom's modest resources were used effectively to sustain his growing military ambitions. These changes were vital for the ambitions of the king's successor, Frederick the Great, who would use his newly militarized kingdom to great effect in the later decades of the 18th century. While Frederick IV and Frederick William had undergone their own periods of upheaval, neither had quite experienced the roller coaster of fortune and catastrophe brought down on Augustus II. His nickname as Augustus the Strong was almost ironic. given the Elector of Saxony and King of Poland had nearly jeopardized the fate of not one, but two great European states.
Well, I feel like he was otherwise occupied, fathering hundreds of children.
After being ousted as the King of Poland by Sweden in 1704, he was replaced with Charles XII's puppet king, Stanisław Leszczyński, then spent the next 5 years fighting tooth and nail to protect Saxony from Charles' relentless campaigning. It was only the Swedish defeat at Poltava in 1709 that gave Augustus the impetus to reclaim his throne in Poland once again. However, his return to power was only made possible thanks to Tsar Peter I, whose great Russian army was forced to pick up the slack in the fight against the Swedish Empire. By 1718, the death of Charles XII ended any potential threat to Augustus' power over Saxony and the Commonwealth, allowing him to resecure his position as Elector and King.
So, I mean, all of this is so important in understanding why the Great Northern War matters, right? Otherwise, it might just be this kind of blip in the grand scheme of all these great wars that have happened in Europe over the centuries. But the ripple effect of the demise of Sweden's empire cannot be overstated in terms of how it empowered some of these other nations.
However, his return in Poland came at a great cost.
Poland forever has this problem of being caught in the middle of other great powers. There they are, right in the midst at this time of Sweden to the north, a growing, you have the Holy Roman Empire to the west and the growing Prussian and eventually German state. You have Russia to the east and you have the Ottomans to the south.
In 1717, Polish ministers, under Russian mediation, imposed severe restrictions on the Commonwealth's autonomy. Augustus was forced to reduce the size of Poland-Lithuania's army to just 24,000 men and accept limitations on Saxon intervention in Polish affairs. For a man who wanted absolute rule over both states, these measures marked the end of his royal ambitions.
Yeah, he's a puppet. He's definitely a puppet. When your status on your throne relies on the others being your benefactor, that's the result.
It also meant increased Russian influence in the Commonwealth, setting a precedent for the growing domination of Polish politics by foreign powers.
Yeah.
In Saxony, the political fallout was not quite as disastrous, but the war itself was taxing. Although Augustus achieved his goal of reclaiming the Polish throne, the prolonged conflict had drained Saxony's treasury and weakened its position within the Holy Roman Empire. All in all, Augustus was left in an extremely compromised position. He may have kept his dual monarchy, but it came at the cost of security, stability, and royal prestige.
And some people are better at balancing those things and handling those different things better than others. And he just may have been in an untenable position, or he just wasn't cut out for being able to do that.
Of all the nations to benefit from the war, it was Russia. The Treaty of Nystad awarded Tsar Peter the Great vast territorial gains.
The Baltic port thing cannot be overstated. This is so important for Russia's future.
Livonia, Estonia, Ingria, and Karelia. These acquisitions gave Russia long sought-after access to the Baltic Sea.
It's not a ton of territory by Russian standards, but it's where it is that matters.
Transforming it into a maritime power and establishing its influence over vital European trade routes. Key to this transformation was the city of St. Petersburg, built on the marshlands along the Neva River. It was the Tsar's jewel on the Baltic Sea, built at immense cost in both resources and lives. The new city required immense labor to drain swamps, lay foundations, and erect fortifications. Thousands of serfs and prisoners were conscripted into forced labor, enduring brutal conditions that led to staggering mortality rates, leaving many to call it a city built on bones. It epitomized Peter's vision of a modern, European-facing empire, becoming a new center of maritime trade. Russian control over key ports like Riga and Reval also shifted the flow of commerce towards Peter's dream city. As a result of this blatant trade steering, Sweden found its influence sharply curtailed as many import goods bypassed its own ports in the Baltic. As the new capital of the burgeoning Russian Empire, St. Petersburg was also more than just a strategic port. It was a cultural and political hub, blending European artistic, architectural, and intellectual influences with Russian traditions.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the gateway to Russia now for all of these Western and Central European powers that are trading with St. Petersburg. It's a game changer for them.
The city symbolized Russia's entry into European high culture, with its theaters, academies, and public institutions echoing the grandeur of Paris and Vienna. Militarily, the Russians had also left the war ascendant. Peter's campaigns against Charles had been a testing ground for his own sweeping military and administrative reforms. His modernization of the Russian army had proven its effectiveness against Sweden's once invincible Karelian forces. The implementation of conscription-based armies also became a model for other powers seeking to professionalize their militaries. Similarly, the construction of a powerful navy gave Russia dominance in the Baltic, demonstrated decisively at the Battle of Gangut in 1714, its first major naval victory. Domestically,
if only they could have carried that attitude and that victorious winning ways with their fleet in the Russo-Japanese War.
Peter's ambitions came at a cost. Heavy taxes on everything from beards to household items burdened the lower class, exacerbating poverty in the cities and creating unrest across rural areas.
Listen, I got no problem with the tax on beards. As somebody who can't really grow one, tax away.
Conscription for Peter's newly reformed army further disrupted rural life. Entire villages were often stripped of able-bodied men to fill the ranks, leaving farms untended and local economies in disarray. The loss of manpower, coupled with famine and plague epidemics during the war, exacted a heavy toll on Russia's population. Peter's vision of a centralized and modernized Russia left little room for regional autonomy, and this was especially evident in his treatment of the Cossacks following the war. The Cossacks were famous for their sense of independence and autonomy, and because of this, they were always seen as a thorn in the Tsar's plan to centralize the state. To quell any potential threats, Peter systematically dismantled the Cossacks' political and military autonomy.
Kind of his own little purge, so to speak.
Military obligations were standardized, forcing Cossacks to serve as auxiliary units in the Russian army, effectively transforming them into an extension of the state's military apparatus. Even with these difficult changes, it was clear that Peter the Great had succeeded in his gamble to uplift the tired Russian Tsardom into a new, fledgling empire capable of going toe-to-toe with even the most prestigious European powers.
I mean, you have a certain level that you can get away with this. You know, you can tax people on their beards, and you can force proud Cossacks into the regular army, and you can do these things when you have demonstrated that you have been a good steward of the country, right? When you've won victories and gained territory and kind of modernized your nation. People are like, all right, maybe this guy knows what he's doing. So even if we don't like some of the stuff he's doing, there's a certain degree to which we'll trust the direction he's taking us.
The aftermath of the Great Northern War marked a new shift in the European balance of power, one that would see Russia as a new and most active participant.
All right, that was great. I learned a lot. I didn't comment as much as I usually do just because I was kind of taking it in and learning myself. So those of you who know more about this topic, let's talk in the comment section below. In just a second, I'll put up on the end screen a link to my look at the Extra History series on this same topic. If you want to look at it from a different version, a different way of telling the story, that's a great place to do that. I want to thank Julie B. and Rachel 0701 for your support on Patreon. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.